Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host, and this week out in Reykjavik, it's getting to that time of year again. It's pretty dark out here right now, so I've been living a pretty quiet life. We've also had a bit of a COVID rise. So between not wanting to go out and it being dark anyway and kind of cold, we had a little flurry of snow too. I've had a lot of time for game stuff. I've been playing a bunch of different games and I've had a really nice mix going on. So I'm going to talk about a couple of them. I'm going to finally review Lost in Random, a game that I finished a few weeks ago now and that I've been planning to review, and I'm finally going to do it this week. It was a game that I had kind of a journey with. I had some really good times with it. There were some things I didn't like quite so much, but I do think it's worth going into. I'm also going to talk about a couple of games I've been trying out on Game Pass and gotten a little sucked into. I'm going to do a mini review of a game called Ring of Pain, a card-based game that is on Game Pass that came on the service a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to talk about Unpacking, a game that has gone slightly viral since it came out. An original, very light story puzzle game about unpacking when you move house and how a life can be understood through objects. Kind of an interesting one as well. I've been enjoying watching the discourse around that game unfold online. It's been getting a lot of media coverage and it's got gamers talking. It's quite an unconventional game, quite an interesting one. I've also played through Chicory. You may have heard of this one when it came out. It caused a bit of a stir. It's only on PlayStation and PC for now, but it's a top-down adventure game, I guess, in the 2D Zelda style. But I've had an amazing time with Chicory, and I think next week's episode might be a full review of that game. But I will just touch on it today as well, as I'm doing my little catch-up on what my week's gaming has looked like. But before I get into talking about the games, I thought I'd give a little shout out to a few pieces of gaming media that I've been enjoying this week. I've been kind of catching up on magazines, on reviews, and listening to a lot of games podcasts. And I thought I would shout out some of the best ones, in case it's interesting to you. I got a copy of Edge magazine in the mail. I haven't bought a computer game magazine, a video game magazine, for so long. I really just can't remember the last time, but I saw Greg, one of the developers of Sable, post that he had designed a cover for Edge for the Sable issue. So I went and sought it out and ordered one. It took a couple of weeks to come, but it finally arrived. And it was really interesting, actually, just holding a copy of Edge magazine. It's changed a lot since it first came out. I remember buying the very first edition of Edge magazine, the first issue, which must have been in the 90s, and really enjoying it. It was very different to everything else that was on offer at that time. I think a lot of video game culture was directed at teenagers and kids, basically. Then Edge magazine seemed like the first one that was really speaking to a slightly older audience, more thoughtful audience, and it had better journalism. And it was also just a very nicely produced magazine. It had very shiny, glossy paper, and the design was very tasteful, rather than the kind of loud, colourful design that we'd been accustomed to. And Edge maintains some of that today. It still has good content. It's pretty cheaply produced now. I guess, like a lot of print media, it's probably been suffering as ads fall, and especially with COVID and stuff, but it's really feels like the kind of magazine you might pick up on like an airline magazine that you might pick up on an airline now. Very thin paper. You can kind of see through the paper. So I was kind of disappointed that it's not a nice thing to hold and to own. But the contents were fantastic, actually. I really enjoyed the reviews. It was a very on-point selection. A lot of the games that I've been hearing about in the podcasts that I listen to and seeing people talking about. So it was nice. I did actually see a couple that I'd not heard of as well. So it was actually really nice. And the cover feature on Sable was a really good read. And as far as I'm aware, Edge doesn't publish their articles online. So I might actually pick it up more often. I'm sure it's the kind of thing that I could probably find locally, even here in Reykjavik. I also watched a video by NoClip. And if you're not aware, NoClip is a couple of guys who started kind of as a Kickstarter project a few years ago, making video game documentaries, kind of long form, I guess, for YouTube. They're usually half an hour plus. And there have been a lot of good ones. They did notably some very good coverage around Hades when they went into the studio during the production of that game and captured what was going on, captured the thoughts of the people involved. So there were interviews with Greg Casavin and Gen Z, the woman who does all of the amazing artwork for the Supergiant games. But I watched one that had just come out. They don't produce an awful lot. Sometimes it can go a month or two between documentaries, so they're not pouring out content in the way that we're used to. But what they do put out is very high quality. And I watched their newest episode about Death's Door the other day. It was an interview with the two British developers that were behind that game. And it talks through where the idea began. It talks through the origins and the iterations that Death's Door came through, the decisions about production, scaling, testing, art style. Just a really, really good look at how Death's Door came together and the kind of philosophy of the developers and what they were aiming for, and their surprise at the critical success of that game. It was a really good watch. So I recommend checking out NoClip as a channel generally, but I really recommend checking out the Death's Door interview. It was a really good watch. I was really happy to see that. Lovely to get a peek inside the process and hear from the people that made a game that you really admire, you know. I would also give a shout out to Sifter. I have been retweeting them a little bit. It's an Australian podcast, video game podcast. They have a show called Mainstream where they just chit-chat about games, and they have a show called Light Map where they interview people. And as I've said, I've been playing a game called Ring of Pain, and Sifter had a great interview with the Aussie developer of Ring of Pain, where they talked through some of the design choices behind that game. I found that really interesting too. In fact, I've really been enjoying all of Sifter's output. It's very relaxed. It's got a nice tone to it. The hosts are very cordial. The tempo is good. The sound quality is good. So it's a really nice listen. It's easy on the ear. The personalities involved are really pleasant. It just hits the spot for me. So I recommend checking out Sifter and specifically that Ring of Pain interview. I would also give a little shout out to my pals over at Time Played 3HR, Louis and Lockie, who reviewed Inscription. I suggested it to them over on their Discord, and they picked up Inscription and made a show about it. So it was really lovely to hear them talking about it, especially as it's a game that I was pretty obsessed with for the time that I was playing. So I've been really hungry for material about Inscription. I've been seeking out video reviews and wanting to hear other people's thoughts about the game, because it's just that kind of game, the kind of game that you want to unpack and you want to hear about. Time Played 3HR, Louis and Lockie did a good job of it, so I recommend their podcast too. I'm going to put links in the show notes to all of the things that I'm talking about, so if you're interested in checking out any of that stuff, I'll put links there so you can find it nice and easily. And as for the games that I've been playing, it's been a really good week actually. I've been in such a nice rhythm with games. Do you ever find that sometimes you have a game that is just really hitting the spot for you and you're looking forward to getting time with it? You know that you have a game that you like in progress. I find that I switch between times when I'm looking for a new game and trying things out, often bouncing on a lot of stuff or flitting between games, and having a game that I really like and just being all the way in and playing it any chance I get. And I'm always looking for that state of having a game that I'm just enjoying so much that I'm always thinking about it in the back of my mind, and I'm looking forward to get those after work hours when I can sit down and play it. And this week was one of those times, but it was spread between a few games actually. Because Unpacking was released, first of all, and that's a game in which it's an isometric pixel art game. When you open cardboard boxes, you take out possessions, having just moved into an empty space, and you just have to scatter your possessions in approximately suitable places throughout this house. And when you finished a box, it folds up, and you open the next one. So you're trying to find where to put your towels, for example. Maybe you've got big bulky towels and there isn't much storage space in a bathroom, so you're putting some of them into your wardrobe. You're unpacking hangers, you're unpacking trophies, posters, candles, cutlery, all of the things that you have to move when you're moving house. But the interesting thing about this game is that it's told across years. So it starts in the late 90s when the protagonist, who you never see or hear anything about really, other than seeing their life through their possessions, is a young girl. So you start off unpacking a kid's room. The next thing you're doing is unpacking a room at college, and then the objects have changed. Some of them are the same, so you'll see some objects recurring, like a teddy bear that was in the kids' room will come to college, and maybe that will come on into the next apartment too. But there are collections that build up over time. You can see interests that turn into, for example, a profession, or you can see, just through these objects, you can see what direction this woman's life is taking. It's a lot of stuff that you should just experience firsthand if that sounds fun, but I will just give one example, and that is that when you're a kid, I think you have an Eiffel Tower. So maybe you've been on a trip to Paris with the family, and then when you unpack in college, you also have a little Leaning Tower of Pisa, and then when you unpack in your next place, you also have a little London bus. And so you can see just from those 3 small objects that you're taking out of boxes that this person started to travel the world. They're going through the kind of experiences that we all go through, traveling, learning, developing, getting interests, and building collections, changing style, going in and out of relationships and other life events. And so it's a very ingenious game that unpacks someone's life, through the process of unpacking their boxes. I really enjoyed the storytelling in this game. It was very creative. I really enjoyed the sound in this game. There's been a tweet going around in which someone puts down a cup on a wooden surface, on a tiled floor, on top of a fridge, on an oven hood, on a dining table, and every time it makes a different sound. There are an immense amount of sound effects in this game that really bring the thing to life, make it feel very physical. So there's been a lot of attention given to the details in this game. And I really enjoyed it. I will say that I stopped after one unpacking session, or 1 year in the game, every night, and played it across, I think, 5 or 6 days, because it was best in small doses. I mean, even one dose was actually sometimes a little... by the end of it, I was getting a little annoyed with it. And I will say that I heard Brad talking about it on the and Carlos over on the So Video Games podcast, and Brad said that he'd found the puzzling, in inverted commas, aspect of this game a little tedious and had turned it off. And that means that at the end of a level, when you've unpacked all your stuff, some objects will get a red outline because they are in the inverted commas wrong place. And so you have to go and look at these little pixel objects and figure out what you've done wrong. And this is actually boring, because usually things that you've put in the wrong place, either you wanted to put there, even if it was an unconventional choice, or more often in my case, you couldn't tell what the object was, because they are pretty small. You can zoom in, but it's still the same amount of pixels. And sometimes there was a jar that could have been a spice jar, it could have been a bottle of perfume, it could have been a bottle of ink, it could have been some paint or something like that, and it could be in 4 places. You can't really tell what it is. There's not enough detail to really tell. And sometimes they were just confusing objects. One, for example, that I was very confused about, and saw a lot of other people talking about as well, was this green and yellow blob that looks a little bit like a half-peeled stick of butter. And I had no idea what it was. Every time I was finishing a level, it was in the wrong place. I actually asked online. It turns out that it was those yellow and green scouring pads that people use in a sink, but it was packaged up in very specific packaging with a kind of wire around it or something. It just did not read as sponges to me. Apparently over in Australia, everyone knows what that looks like. It's the only way that those sponges are packaged. But here in Europe, you get them in a stick of 5, vertically, and this was in like a block of 10 horizontally, and so it just didn't read to me what the object was. And that happened a few times, and so it became like a little tedious at the end when you just had a couple of lingering objects that you didn't know what they were necessarily. The game's graphical style doesn't really always work in telling you what the objects are, and there is no text. For example, if you hover over something, it would be great if there was a tooltip that came up, sponges, and you'd know straight away, but there isn't. Another small critique of the game is that sometimes when you take out 5 plates and stack them, and then you take out 5 dishes and stack them, and then 5 side plates and stack them, I kind of wish that had been 3 clicks instead of 15 clicks, or rather 30 clicks, one to pick it up, one to put it down. So that's 30 clicks to take out your plates, small plates and bowls. And that could get a little tedious, and this is even as someone that was playing it in basically 20-minute stints. So despite the fact that the game is good, it is inventive, it's unusual, it is original, it does a lot with a little. I love the idea of telling a life story through objects, and I love the breaking up into chapters of life. I love the idea of using house moves to punctuate a life, and as a method of telling a biography. But there were a few details in there, in just the mechanics of it, such as this many clicks for same objects, such as unclear items. It did take the shine off it a little bit. But Brad did say, to go right around the houses, to get back to my point there, that you can go into the options and you can turn off that puzzle aspect. The game gives you a little warning and says, this will no longer be a puzzle game. But I, for one, was absolutely fine with that. I just wanted to unpack my shit in my own way and not have the game tell me I was doing it wrong because I'd put a blanket in the living room instead of in the wardrobe or whatever. So that's Unpacking. I had a nice time with it. I would recommend playing it. It's 3 hours in total to complete it. There are a lot of secrets in there as well. You can interact with some objects and get extra trophies and things like that. It's very charming. It's on Game Pass. So if you have Game Pass, I say give it a try. You'll know pretty quickly whether you like it or not, I think. I also continued playing Lost Words. I mentioned that one last week. It's kind of a kid's game, I guess. It's a fairy tale mixed with a child's diary. And you know, in Psychonauts 2, if you've played that one, there are levels where you are, for example, running through X-rays all of a sudden, or you're running through pages, because Psychonauts 2, you're moving through people's thoughts as environments, and so it shifts all the time. And this game has platforming that is in a diary, so you're looking at an open book, the words appear on the page, and as they appear, you can platform across them, and there is a spoken word narration of what's going on. Drawings will appear in the diary in colours, and you jump onto words that trigger effects. And this is when the girl who's writing the diary is telling you about her gran is ill. She's telling you that life is a little hard right now. And then to escape from that reality, she writes a story. And that's when the game turns into a full colour, side-on platform game set in a fantastical world. So this little girl is vanishing into her story writing as a way to cope with difficult events. And you play through her diary, and then you play through her fantasy. And in the fantasy, you're a princess with magical powers who can use words to lift things, or to break things, or to repair things. For example, to break a tree that will then form a bridge, and then you can lift that tree back up if you need to use it to get to a high place. You can make platforms spring out of the ground like rock outcroppings to reach high places. And so it's an interesting, fun children's game, basically. It's very simple. And for that reason, it's another game that I've been playing in one level. It takes about 10 to 20 minutes to do a level of it, and I've been playing a level a night. And then finally, another game that I was playing this week was Chicory. Just the most adorable game. A game in which you are looking down at a black and white world. You play a little dog, just a black outline of a dog, a cartoon dog. You run around, you talk to people, you have a magic brush that you can use to colour the landscape, which has been drained of colour. And that's the central mechanic of the game, is that you're wielding a magic brush. The dialogue is brilliant, and the puzzles are great, the bosses are great. I'm just really in love with that game. And I am going to talk about Chicory next week, I think, and give it a full review because it really deserves one. So I won't mention it much, but the point I was getting to was that between Unpacking, Lost Words and Chicory, I got into such a nice routine because the nights are so dark in Reykjavik now that I would just finish work, go and make my dinner and relax a little. Then I would come and sit down, and I'd be really looking forward to this time of the night, like 2 hours of gaming. And I would just do a level of Unpacking, and then I would do a level of Lost Words, and then I'd move over to the sofa from my monitor and sit down and play an hour of Chicory, which is a 15-hour game or so. And it was so nice to have that little routine of 3 games that you're really enjoying. All 3 of them are very much in the wholesome games category, all a little innocent, but all with a little edge to them as well. Like, it's not pure kind of baby game stuff. Like Unpacking has, life events. Lost Words has this dark edge to it, as someone has an elderly relative who's not doing well. And Chicory actually deals with all kinds of themes of self-confidence, anxiety, and things like that. It has some deep themes in this ostensibly innocent game. So I had these 3 wonderful games going round on rotation, and it's just been a really fun week. I don't think that I'll have a week like this where I've got 3 games that I'm enjoying quite this much again this year. And I did actually try to incorporate Ring of Pain into that routine as well. This is quite an interesting one. It's a card game, and I'm always up for trying out a new card game. It's interesting in that it's a 2.5D game, so you're not looking down at a flat table, but the cards, there are 2 facing you, and then you can see 2 behind them, and then 2 behind them, but they are moving away in a space, so it's like you're looking at cards that are standing up in a 3-dimensional space. It's quite an interesting presentation. Maybe you just have to look at it. It's hard to describe. I'm not sure I did such a good job there. But it's a dungeon diving card game with a roguelike element to it. The obvious comparison is, of course, Slay the Spire. Rather than going up through the levels to the top of the spire, you're going down in Ring of Pain through different layers, different rings. And what happens is basically there are 2 cards facing you. You can see those other ones in the distance. You can move left or move right to move around the ring and to see different cards. You can see what some of the other cards are. You can see that they might be enemy cards, or they might be stat boost cards, or they might be items that you can pick up. So you might know what kind of card type it is, but you won't know what specific card it is until it's in those 2 that are facing you. And that's when you'll find out how powerful the enemy is, what kind of door it might be, or what kind of power-up it might be. So you're constantly turning this ring around, deciding which way to go, betting on whether or not that enemy is going to be one that you can defeat easily. There's lots of risk and reward strategy thinking going on there, in which way you turn the ring. And all you really have to do to get through a level is get to a door and exit it. Some doors lead to harder enemies and have a skull on them. Some doors lead to a choice of routes that'll have 3 doors on it. Some are just a black door, and it will just take you out of that level down to the next ring. But those levels have enemies in them. The enemies have hit points, they have shield points, they have a bunch of different stats. You can choose whether to attack them or to try and sneak past them. Based on how high your stats are, attacking or sneaking might be the best option. If you've got you can see what percentage chance you have of a successful sneak. You can see how your attack stats line up with the enemy's defense stats, so you might one-hit them. In that case, you can just go around hacking everyone in the level and getting all of the currency and then go down again. Or you might have somewhere in the middle. You might have some really high defense stats but really low attack, so you know that you can take a lot of damage, but it's going to take a while for you to get through those enemies. And so you can kind of form your strategy based on the odds of success. You try and do a build. You have 13 different item slots and a couple of different magic item slots. There are 180 different items that you can find in chests, such as a helmet that will just boost your defense, through to offensive weapons, through to armor, through to spell scrolls, a jar of magic ice that freezes all of the enemies when they hit you, things like that. And so it's quite engaging, and for the first couple of hours of playing this game, I was really into it. I was thinking, I don't really understand what's happening here fully, but that's just how it goes with card games at the start. There is always a period when you're just groping around in the dark and it's a little difficult. But I have to say that as I kept playing Ring of Pain, I felt like I was not making much progress. It didn't seem to get any easier. It's no stats carry over, so you really do start every run from zero. As far as I know, no items carry over. The game doesn't communicate with you incredibly well. I don't think it's very well tutorialized, like it has many systems at play, the way all card games do. But I really still don't feel like I've been told what they are. It's very much left to the player to orientate themselves within the game to a degree that I found a little problematic as someone that has engaged with it for several hours now. And I found that I think that 13 item slots is kind of too many. If you're picking up odd items here and there on different floors, and there are so many different items that do so many different things, I found it very hard to come up with winning strategies, basically. There are so many options going on, so many things to learn, and so much variety in what can happen, so much RNG going on, so much random number generation. It's just deciding your fate, that I found that the strategy was outweighed by the randomness, and that there was almost too much to be able to form reliable plans, or at least I will say that as a player, I didn't get to that level. And so after a while, I just kind of became frustrated with it. I would do a run on a night, go down to level, I think the furthest I ever got was level 14 or something, I'm not sure how many there are, and feel like I was just getting to a really good point with strong attack, good defense, but then the enemies ramp up and suddenly you've just died in one hit because you got stuck or cornered or something bad happened. Maybe there were suddenly enemies that were shooting you from the back row and you just couldn't get around to a door in time. Sometimes you just get absolutely brutally squashed, even in the best possible run, in a way that feels much more brutal than a game like Slay the Spire, which is quite hard until you get your strategies in order. But in Ring of Pain, I felt like getting a strategy in order wasn't really happening. When I was playing Slay the Spire, I felt like I was always learning. Every object that I would use, or every charm that I would get, I would understand what it was and see if it had a desirable effect on my run, and see if it had synergies with different things, like... Because one thing that I haven't said is that in Ring of Pain, you don't play cards. You just attack or sneak. That's all you can really do. And so you don't build a deck. You build your kind of armory of items. So it's a non-traditional card game in that sense. The cards are all enemies that you're rolling the dice against. And I will actually compliment it by saying that it's on a controller. I played it on Xbox. And traditionally I found that card games suffer on controllers. Usually you need to click and drag cards, that sort of thing, to build your deck and to play. Slay the Spire, I play on a touchscreen. I didn't like it on PlayStation 4. But Ring of Pain is ideally mapped to the controller. You hit the shoulder buttons to rotate the deck, you hit one button to attack, one button to play an item, and it feels perfect. It's a card game that has been mapped perfectly to a console experience. I just found that it was too damn hard. Too damn hard to understand, too damn hard to play, too punishing. It's a punishing card game. Doesn't really seem to care too much about drawing you in, teaching you the workings of the game. It's more just like a block of different things to try and learn without any help at all, and many enemies that will just one-shot you and end your run immediately. I didn't find that I came up with any good strategies. I found that I got frustrated with it. And so I think it's actually too hard. I will just come out and say it. I think there is some stigma in video games journalism in saying that a game was too hard. There's a lot of kind of ego stuff that goes on with this subject, where people feel that if they haven't measured up against a game, that they have in some way failed. I don't personally feel that way. I feel like I'm making a design comment rather than a comment about my own gaming skill or whatever. I've played a few card games and I've identified things that I liked in them, things that I didn't. card games that stuck with me and card games that didn't. And this one didn't stick with me. I don't think that it's quite right somehow. There's something missing in the way that it all hangs together. I think this is a common opinion. It's a pretty tough game. On that Sifter podcast, the host mentioned that he had also felt the same way, and the game developer kind of laughed and agreed it's supposed to be a hard game. So it's not one that I'm going to stick with. I think for a card game to be fun, you have to feel like you're at least learning on every run. That wasn't the case on Ring of Pain. Something about the way that the objects and the boons were all structured didn't work for me. But I thought I would mention it here. I know that some of my listeners also like card games. I know that a lot of listeners are on Game Pass. So that one is there for you. I mean, why not give it a try? I would say that the first few hours of it, I was enjoying it until I just hit that wall and found myself going in circles. Going in a Ring of Pain, no less. So that's Ring of Pain. And before I move on to Lost in Random, I will quickly mention that this show is patron supported. And I got a couple new patrons last week. It was really nice to see those notifications coming in. So I would like to give a big thank you to Zuhan, to Brad, and to Jason for signing up for the show's Patreon. You can do that at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. It's $1 a month minimum, $3 or $5. And for that, you'll get occasional extra episodes, an invitation to the Discord community, which has been really lively lately. People are really chatting about what they're all playing, talking about the new Animal Crossing stuff that's coming out, talking about the various directs that have taken place. People are very excited about Forza Horizon 5. There's always some good, lively chat going on in there, and some really nice people. It's a good little community. And you will get those extra episodes. I also do sale recommendations if something catches my eye that's perhaps going under the radar. A game that I've covered on the show that is going for a good price. I will flag that to my patrons as well. So it's patreon.com/gaminginthewild if you would like to support the show. I really do appreciate everyone that chooses to do so. So thank you to all of my existing patrons, and thank you to you if that's something that you're thinking about doing. And with that said, let's move on and talk about the featured game of the episode, Lost in Random. So Lost in Random is a 2021 game by Zoink, published by EA Originals. Zoink is a name that I had heard before, and when I looked it up I realised they are the makers of Thea. It's another game I featured on the podcast. It was a really fun gothic fairy tale game, and this is another one, even though it goes in a very different direction. And this is how the developers describe the game. They say, "Play the odds in Lost in Random, TM. A gothic fairy tale inspired action adventure where every citizen's fate is determined by a roll of the dice. Play the odds, win the game." And I say it's a gothic third-person fairy tale adventure about a land ruled by chance. That's like a video game version of The Nightmare Before Christmas. You battle through 6 realms on your way to face a wicked queen, using an interesting mix of dice, decks, and live-action combat. And this game has done okay critically. It has 77 on Metacritic on PC, 80 on PlayStation. It's a pretty consistent 7 or 8 out of 10 from players. How Long to Beat has it at 12 to 14 hours, or 18 for completionists. I came in at somewhere around 15. And it was my usual style. Like I'm never a completionist, really. I'm not searching every corner. If I see something in a hard-to-reach place, I'll try for a little while to find it, but I won't break my back, I won't do any second runs. So coming in at about 15 hours, just above the basic runtime, seems about right. That's the kind of run that I do. And you start the game as a little girl called Odd. You live in a place called Oneville. It's a run-down, dark, gothic-looking village that's basically in a swamp. You're creeping around with your sister, with the other urchins who live in this town in this kind of Oliver Twist style. And the first thing that I noticed about the game is the look of it. I played it on a PS5 where it ran pretty well. It has a really nice, slick 60 frames per second frame rate. It was running in 4K, and the art style is notable. It's notable in that it's lifted directly from The Nightmare Before Christmas. Lots of tall, skinny people, lots of short, tubby people. And everything looks like it was made in claymation. I'm not sure anyone says claymation anymore, but there was a hot minute where people talked about that. But everything looks like it was made physically, and it's been animated. Things look a little macabre. They have the same atmosphere as perhaps a ventriloquist dummy, or a sort of strangely painted figurines that you will deal with. And they're a little stiff in movement too. It's got that kind of hinged elbow and wrist, hinged knees, stubby little legs running back and forth, look about it. But it's well lit, it's got a good palette, and it's got that nice claymation look to it. It looks like you're playing with models. And it's very much a love letter to tabletop gaming and to decks and dice and all of that kind of stuff. So all of that is folded in with the art style too. And at the start of the game, your twin sister is kidnapped by a wicked queen who whisks her off to live in Sixtopia, where special children go. And this queen rolls a dice whenever anyone becomes 12 years of age, and the number that they get will define which of the 6 realms they live in for the rest of their days. So this is a land called Random, where a wicked queen has the only dice, and she decides everyone's fate by throwing her dice. No one else has a dice. Dice have been banned. She's the only person who has one. And she has something weird going on. She has these kind of spider carriages where she takes all of the children that roll 6s and whisks them off to some strange place. And Odd is voiced in the style that so many video games have been lately. Lost Words that I talked about earlier is the same. Lots of games use a kind of a Hermione Granger voice. So you're called Odd, you sound like Hermione Granger. Your sister is called Even, she's been spirited away, and you decide that you're going to go and get her back. You sneak out of town at night. You have a dream of where she might be. There'll be various dream sequences in the game where you move through a dream. But Odd just decides to go for it. She leaves home. She sneaks onto one of the spider carriages that go to Sixtopia, and off she goes. She is discovered at some point, and there is some kind of disaster. This spider carriage crashes. Odd goes tumbling out, and she lands in a strange place made out of dice. No one else is there. There are dice stacked up in a town-sized environment, and you find a dice there. It's a little walking dice. It has little stubby legs and little arms. It runs around after you. It squeaks like R2-D2 and becomes your buddy. And this dice can be rolled. When it rolls, it freezes time. And this is where this game combines a few different ideas in quite an interesting way, actually. You'll be walking around doing your story stuff, and then suddenly you'll see some cards on the walls, and you'll know that you're entering a combat arena. Enemies appear, and you are basically unarmed. These enemies will appear, the doors will swing shut, they'll lurch towards you, and all you have is a catapult that doesn't do any damage at all. But you do also have some cards. You have a sword card, a shield card, a heal card. I think those are the ones you start with. And if you can use your catapult to break little crystals off these enemies, which are usually quite slow moving at first, your dice can collect those crystals and charge you up. When you've reached a certain level of charge, you can pause time. So you have to break off the crystals, collect the charge, pause time, roll the dice. The dice only has 1 or 2 on it at first. The other sides are all broken. If you roll a 1, you get to play 1 card. If you roll a 2, you get to play 2 cards. I think a sword is 2. So for a lot of the early game, you're doing rolls, you're breaking off crystals, you're not getting a weapon, and it can be a little trying. But as the game progresses, you'll get more pips in your dice, you can roll higher numbers, you'll get cards of all different types, different kinds of weapons and spells. And when you're finished, when you've picked the card you want to play, time has been frozen, except for you. You can position yourself advantageously in the arena and then restart time. Maybe now you've got a sword, so you can be hacking away at your enemy from behind. You can dodge roll. You take down all your enemies. If your weapons are destructible, they break after a while, and then time is running normally. You have to break off more crystals, charge up to roll again. play more cards, and then move on through your combat encounter. And as you move through the game, you can collect currency. There are jars everywhere that you can shoot with your catapult. You'll get currency from combat encounters. And there's a guy called Manny Dex who you'll meet all throughout the game. He's an NPC who lives in a wardrobe. He swings the doors open when you come near, and you can buy cards from him. You are also sometimes rewarded cards for side quests, like little fetch quests that you can do, or for particularly difficult combat encounters. There are boss encounters. There are all different kinds of combat encounters, and the combat is actually the highlight of this game for me. I really did enjoy this mixture of strategic deck building, of dice game, of choosing what cards to play, and the different elements that are introduced. For example, if you have a battle axe card that costs 4, and you've rolled a 2, at some point in the game you'll get a little clip that you can put on that card. It will keep it at the top of your shuffle, so the next time you roll a dice, it will still be there in your hand, and maybe you will roll a 4 and you'll have more chance of being able to play your most powerful card. And the game really does ramp up the complexity and the different strategies that are available to you, the different combinations of enemies that are coming at you, and the different kind of time trial or objective-based combat arenas. It's really, really fun, the combat in this game. It kind of saves the game to some degree, actually, because it has many problems in other areas, but the one area where this game really excels is in this card and dice-based combat environments that are really, really fun. I took several breaks from this game midway through it because I'd had enough of it for a while. But the thing that always brought me back was wanting to play more combat arenas, which does suggest that maybe they were onto something really good with the combat, but using it to punctuate something of a substandard third-person, pretty average action-adventure wasn't the move here. Maybe it could have been structured differently. Maybe the interesting mixture of live-action dice and cards, it could have been a different kind of progression, like moving through combat levels rather than these quite stodgy, overlong action-adventure segments where you're just walking around getting exposition dumps and lore dumps, doing not particularly interesting side quests, and talking to lots of people. That aspect of the game wasn't that satisfying, to me at least. Some people might find it as bewitching as it seems to think it is, but to me it was like a market stall knockoff Nightmare Before Christmas, basically, from the mayor that has 2 faces, is also featured in this game, to the giant wolf character that is very, very clearly, instantly recognisable from Nightmare Before Christmas. They really did just copy Nightmare Before Christmas in the most blatant way. It's kind of shocking and brazen, really, the level to which this game just lifts the Nightmare Before Christmas's entire thing. I mean, you probably heard the music there. It's a lift from Danny Elfman. All of the character models are lifts. Several of the story beats also seem to be lifted directly or extrapolated from Nightmare Before Christmas. And yeah, there are a lot of things that really stuck in my throat with this game, I have to say. The pervasive Nightmare Before Christmas copyism was one. Also, the movement is quite janky. You get caught on scenery a lot. You run quite slowly. You can't jump, so if you get stuck against a small step that isn't quite the right height for you to walk over, you're just running against it. There's not even a little hop that you can use to move through the game. And so you're often getting stuck. And because of the aesthetic of narrow, jaggedy, zigzaggy pathways with broken boards and thin pathways over fat houses, that timber and aesthetic, basically, none of the walking spaces are particularly wide. They're all very narrow and very jaggedy, and so you're constantly getting caught on scenery. It all looks kind of the same palette throughout the game, mostly. They reused the same character models a lot, so that wolf guy or that top hat guy, Manny Dex, is the same everywhere you go. There are maybe 5 or 6 different character models, and they are just copy-pasted from town to town to town, given a different name. Every time I see them, I'm like, oh, it's that one again. They just fell into these groups No one really felt like an original character as you're coming through the game. There was one human man, one human woman, one female child, one male child, a wolf guy, a kind of a fish guy, and you just literally see the same model again and again and again and again. And they're pretty stiff as well. They just stand around. So if you come into a new area, you'll see a wolf guy standing there. Just like, it's more like a ghost train. You know when a game feels like you're just on rails, it's linear, and there are things there to amuse you. It's the difference between a game where you're moving through a believable world where people are going about their business and you just happen to be passing through, to the ghost train mentality when you're like, yep, this game is here, this is all here for my amusement and only for my amusement. Definitely not a real world, definitely not believable in any way. Just given up on all of that stuff. There is one point where you come into a busy city and I think your character says, wow, look how busy it is here. And I looked around and there was just one stiff-limbed wolf walking up and down some steps again and again and again. One person just standing still waiting for me to talk to them. And I was like, no, this is not a busy, bustling metropolis. This is not what was advertised on the tin. So for me, the action-adventure part of this game is pretty much a fail. I wasn't particularly invested in the story. I wasn't particularly invested in the world. I was playing for the combat, which was really, really fun. It's really well put together. It's addictive and engaging, and it kind of holds this game together. It's the glue that holds this game together, because for all of the combat being good and the action-adventure part being bad, this game is generally a little rough around the edges, I would say. There are some strange choices that have been made here. The protagonist is half voice acted and half not, which I found very strange. For the first maybe third of the game, I thought that she couldn't speak or she was mute, because other characters would be voiced and then you would just see text for her, which I found very strange. And then at some point she starts talking suddenly, like Hermione Granger, and I was like, hey, what the hell? I thought she couldn't speak. So I don't know why they didn't just voice act the whole thing. It just feels odd. It feels very odd. Those reused character models are kind of a joke, really. I mean, there really should have been more to make the world feel populated and to differentiate one place from another. There was this. I guess there's a lot of reused assets in this game, which I can kind of understand. I mean, it's an indie game, but it's an EA published, fully professional studio indie game, so I'm not quite sure why the game isn't fully fleshed out in some ways. I'm not sure if there was something that went on in the design process where they didn't have the time to make enough characters to populate their world, or if there was just some kind of miscalculation in the design process. It's mystifying. I'm not exactly sure what the thinking is there, you know. There are also some bugs in the game. Some characters have two vocal tracks running simultaneously, so you might walk past someone, they'll start saying something, but if you click talk, they'll start saying something else, and the two run over each other. Sometimes even the same line. It's very, very shabby. There are invisible walls everywhere in the game. You'll find yourself running against, trying to run down a tempting-looking alleyway and just running against an invisible wall. And there's also these slow walking sequences where your character gets tired and just walks very, very slowly. Journey was the game that introduced this, I think. When you start getting towards the end of your journey, your character becomes very tired and is wading through snow. And in Journey, it really worked. It was part of this overall structure of really feeling like you'd been through the mill on your journey. But lots of other games do this now too. They have these kind of pointless slow walk sections. In this game, it's if your character's feeling a little sad and she's maybe in a dream or having a nightmare, you have to slow walk for several minutes through a dream sequence where there's nothing else to do. It's not like Journey. You're not summiting a mountain. I was literally checking my phone in my right hand, holding forward on the joystick with my left, waiting for it to end, because you just have to get through them. I also felt like my sights were off using the catapult, honestly, which is a bit of a big one when you're aiming at something and there seems to be nothing between you and it. Sometimes your bullet would just vanish as if it had hit something. Something was a bit off with that as well, unfortunately. So it's a game that has a lot of problems. I would say if I was reviewing this one, I would give it maybe a 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10. But I think that for people that like tabletop games and that are willing to kind of come through a Tim Burton pastiche for some fun combat with tabletop elements, with deck building elements, it's a game that I quite enjoyed. It's mid-priced. I've got a feeling it's going to be on sale for, very decent prices over the next 6 months. So if you're holding out for this one, you can probably get it for 15 or 20 quid on your PlayStation 5. I would say that 15 hours, a couple of play sessions over a couple of weekends, it was fine. It's not a glowing recommendation, I know, but it's a game that I had a mixed response to, but I really did like the combat, and I had fun with it. When it's good, it's good, but there's just a lot of loose ends, a lot of strange decisions, a lot of janky bits and pieces. But it does look very slick. 60 FPS is a real treat. The performance is good. It was nice to play on PS5, and if you do like that Nightmare Before Christmas aesthetic, you'll definitely have it, especially if you are like an enthusiast or a super fan of that film. Then you'll find something to like here. Also, I think fans of tabletop games and card games and deck builders generally will find something to like here. It's quite innovative in how it puts it all together. That's Lost in Random. So that was Lost in Random. I hope you enjoyed the show this week. That was quite a long episode actually, packed a lot in there. I played a lot of games. I've had a really good time with Chicory, with Unpacking, with all of the other games that I've been playing. If you would like to tell me what you think about any of the games that I've covered today, or suggest a game to me, or tell me what you're playing, share a screenshot, share an opinion, you can find me on social media as Gaming in the Wild, on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube and Facebook. Also on Twitch, I stream sometimes, pretty infrequently, but you can always follow me on Twitch if you'd like to catch one of those streams sometime. If you would like to support the show, then please do share it with someone, share it with a friend, or post it out on social media. I always appreciate that. Apple Podcast reviews are helpful. And finally, there is that Patreon. If you really do like the podcast and would like to show your support and join the community, it's patreon.com/gaminginthewild. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next week with a new episode. I'm pretty sure it's going to be about Chicory because I really did have a good time with that one. Take care of yourselves and each other. Bye-bye for now.